Hey everyone, I'm John Mabel and welcome back to JW Review. In our last series of videos, we took a look at the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses and reviewed all of their claims to authority, concluding that with no evidence and no biblical basis, they have no authority over the Christian congregations. Check those videos out if you haven't already by clicking the link in the description or the info card above. But if the leaders of the organization are not appointed by God to take the lead, then what are they? Many other Christian denominations claim them to be false prophets, but does this accusation have any merit? This is what we'll be looking at today, discussing the question, is the Watchtower Society a false prophet? When it comes to false prophets, the Bible makes it crystal clear that we should avoid them and warns us several times about it. If there are so many warnings in the Bible about not being deceived by false prophets, then this means that 1. Many people will be tricked into following these false prophets, thinking that they are doing the right thing, and that's why. 2. It's super important for us to be able to identify them and be on guard against them. This is why these warnings are so important and why it's vital for us to answer the question of whether or not the society is a false prophet. So, let's start by defining what a false prophet is. Now, rather than using a definition from a dictionary or some other theological source, instead we're going to establish how the Bible itself defines a false prophet and how the Organization of Jehovah's Witnesses have defined false prophets. First, let's start with the Bible. Let's take a look at Deuteronomy 18:20-22. If any prophet presumptuously speaks a word in my name that I did not command him to speak, or speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet must die. However, you may say in your heart, how will we know that Jehovah has not spoken the word? When the prophet speaks in the name of Jehovah and the word is not fulfilled or does not come true, then Jehovah did not speak that word. The prophet spoke it presumptuously. You should not fear him. Next, let's take a look at how the organization describes a false prophet. The May 1st, 1997 Watchtower has this to say in an article titled, Identifying the Right Kind of Messenger. Jehovah God is the grand identifier of his true messengers. He identifies them by making the messages that he delivers through them come true. Jehovah is also the great exposer of false messengers. How does he expose them? He frustrates their signs and predictions. In this way, he shows that they are self-appointed prognosticators whose messages really spring from their own false reasoning. Lastly, the book Reasoning from the Scriptures has this definition of false prophets. Individuals and organizations proclaiming messages that they attribute to a superhuman source, but that do not originate with the true God and are not in harmony with his revealed will. So, a false prophet, according to the Bible and to the Organization of Jehovah's Witnesses, is someone who 1. Speaks a word, proclaims a message, or makes a prediction. 2. Claims that that message or prediction comes from God. And 3. That message or prediction ends up being proven false and does not come true. So, moving forward, this will be the formula that we'll be using to identify a false prophet. The Organization of Jehovah's Witnesses have attempted to defend themselves against the accusations of being a false prophet, as this accusation has been around for a while. In the March 22, 1993 Awake, the footnote says the following. Jehovah's Witnesses, in their eagerness for Jesus' second coming, have suggested dates that turned out to be incorrect. Because of this, some have called them false prophets. Never in these instances, however, did they presume to originate predictions in the name of Jehovah. Never did they say, these are the words of Jehovah. The Watchtower, the official journal of Jehovah's Witnesses, has said, we have not the gift of prophecy, nor would we have our writings reverenced or regarded as infallible. The Watchtower has also said that the fact that some have Jehovah's Spirit does not mean those now serving as Jehovah's Witnesses are inspired. It does not mean that the writings in this magazine, The Watchtower, are inspired and infallible and without mistakes. The Watchtower does not claim to be inspired in its utterances, nor is it dogmatic. The brothers preparing these publications are not infallible. Their writings are not inspired as are those of Paul and the other Bible writers, and so, at times, it has been necessary, as understandings become clearer, to correct views. One of the first things that caught my eye in this statement is that they claim to not be dogmatic. Listen to how this member of the governing body defines dogma.
I noticed that the Greek there, the word dogmata, well, you can hear the word dogma there. Well, things have changed. What it means in English now is certainly not anything we want to say the faithful slave is guilty of. Notice here what dictionaries have had to say. If you refer to a belief or a system of beliefs as a dogma, you disapprove of it because people are expected to accept that it is true without questioning it. Well, I don't think we would want to apply this to decisions that come out from the faithful slave.
Here he has admitted that the term dogma or dogmatic is defined as a system of beliefs that is simply accepted as true, and that followers must accept it without questioning it, and that this somehow does not apply to the faithful and discreet slave. However, in the November 15th, 2009 Watchtower, it says this: "We need to guard against developing a spirit of independence. By word or action, may we never challenge the channel of communication that Jehovah is using today." We are being told here to never, by word or action, question or challenge the teachings of the governing body. How is this not the exact definition of dogmatic? They also claim over and over in this statement that they never said the words, "in the name of Jehovah," or "these are the words of Jehovah," because they are not inspired or infallible. Yet, in the very same sentence in that 2009 Watchtower quote, they call themselves Jehovah's channel of communication. And in the book, "The Nations Shall Know That I Am Jehovah," they claim to have been commissioned to serve as the mouthpiece and active agent of Jehovah. You simply can't have it both ways. You can't call yourself Jehovah's mouthpiece and channel of communication, using yourself as the means by which God speaks to mankind, but then say that you aren't infallible or inspired. If you call yourself Jehovah's mouthpiece and channel of communication, you are essentially claiming to speak on behalf of Jehovah. If what they teach are the words of God, then they are inspired and their predictions should have been 100% correct. If their teachings are not inspired, and therefore just their best guess, then they shouldn't be dogmatic and expect everyone to agree without question upon penalty of shunning and isolation. And if because of that their predictions are wrong, then they are just as presumptuous as the false prophets in Deuteronomy. Their statement in defense of their past predictions seems to be nothing more than a big game of semantics and contradictions. So now, without further ado, let's take a look at some of the messages and predictions that the Watchtower Society has made in the past and see if they fall into our formula of what makes a false prophet. 1914 has been a crucial year for Jehovah's Witnesses when it comes to doctrine. They teach that Jesus returned invisibly and was enthroned as king in 1914, and that marked the start of the last days of this system of things. This is what they teach now. But is this what they've always taught? The January 22nd, 1973 Awake seems to think so, saying, Jehovah's Witnesses pointed to the year 1914, decades in advance, as marking the start of the conclusion of the system of things. Let's find out if this is true. The 1902 edition of the book The Time Is at Hand had this to say regarding their beliefs on what would happen in 1914. Be not surprised, then, when in subsequent chapters we present proofs that the battle of the great day of God Almighty, which will end in AD 1914 with the complete overthrow of Earth's present rulership, is already commenced. So what we find is actually the opposite of what was claimed. Not only did they not teach that 1914 was the start of the conclusion of the system of things, they instead taught that Armageddon was well underway and predicted that it would end in 1914 with the overthrow of all human governments. That's what the witnesses pointed to decades in advance. And 1914 came and went, and this system of things did not conclude with the overthrow of all human governments at the end of Armageddon. Now, rather than apologize and take responsibility for the prediction that didn't come true, this is how the Watchtower Society handled it. In their book, Vindication, they said regarding the failed 1914 prediction, God's covenant of people had waited, and, while waiting, there were some curious speculations indulged in by them, which were mere guesses, of course, and therefore not true, because it was not God's time for them to understand. Suddenly, all of those chapters full of proof for their 1914 prediction in the Time is at Hand book became mere guesses and speculation, because it conveniently wasn't God's time for them to understand it. So, going back to our false prophet formula, regarding the first point, they definitely made a prediction saying that Armageddon and all world governments would end in 1914. Regarding the second point, though they did not say the words, "in the name of Jehovah," while making this prediction, they did attempt to provide several chapters full of what they considered biblical proof. And by calling it proof from the Bible, you're implying that this is what Jehovah is saying as author of the Bible. So they do meet point number 2. And point number 3 should be obvious since we're all still alive and living amongst human governments. So with that, we can biblically label the Watchtower Society a false prophet. And all it takes is one false prediction to make it so. No true prophet from the Bible ever got it wrong once in a while. But this video would be boring with just one piece of evidence, so let's move on to the next prediction. The 1925 prediction is another one of the major predictions that the Watchtower has made throughout the years. Let's start by taking a look at some of their earlier quotes. This one is from 1920 in a book called "Millions Now Living Will Never Die," which, by the way, is also a false prophecy, because if there is anybody still alive today from the 1920s, I'd be willing to bet that they don't number in the thousands, much less the millions. As we have heretofore stated, the Great Jubilee cycle is due to begin in 1925. Therefore, we may confidently expect that 1925 will mark the return of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the faithful prophets of old. So, they predicted that faithful Bible characters like Abraham and Isaac were going to be resurrected here on earth in 1925 in order to usher in the return of paradise to earth. How confident were they of this prediction? Fast forward to 1922, and you have the September 1st Watchtower article saying this: "The physical facts show beyond question of a doubt that 1914 ended the Gentile times. The date 1925 is even more distinctly indicated by the scriptures because it is fixed by the law God gave to Israel." They were so confident in this prediction, they claimed they had more biblical evidence for it than for 1914. And finally, we have the April 1st, 1923 Watchtower saying this: "Our thought is that 1925 is definitely settled by the scriptures, marking the end of the typical jubilees." Fast forward to the year in question, 1925. It appears that the people back at Watchtower headquarters are starting to get a bit nervous and are trying to quell expectations, as seen by this quote from the January 1st, 1925 Watchtower. The year 1925 is here. With great expectation, Christians have looked forward to this year. Many have confidently expected that all members of the body of Christ will be changed to heavenly glory during this year. This may be accomplished. It may not be. In His own due time, God will accomplish His purposes concerning His own people. Christians should not be so deeply concerned about what may transpire during this year that they would fail to joyfully do what the Lord would have them do. Weren't we supposed to confidently expect this prediction to come true? Or what about the February 15th, 1925 Watchtower article that stated this? It seems to be a weakness of many Bible students that if they locate a future date in the Bible, immediately they center as many prophecies upon that date as possible. The difficulty was that the Friends inflated their imaginations beyond reason. The Friends having inflated imaginations? I thought that we find 1925 distinctly indicated by the scriptures, even more so than 1914. And what about the August 1st, 1926 Watchtower that said, "Some anticipated that the work would end in 1925, but the Lord did not so state." The Lord did not so state? I thought that 1925 was definitely settled by the scriptures, whose author, by the way, is the Lord. Back to our false prophet formula. We clearly see that they made a prediction for the year 1925. We see how clearly and repeatedly they state that this is a matter of biblical fact, thus claiming that it's from God. And 1925 came and went with absolutely nothing happening. Another failed prophecy. Let's take a look at one more prediction made by the Society. This one is probably the most infamous and well-known prediction to come from the Watchtower Society, predicting that Armageddon would happen by 1975. Expectations were so high, you even had talks given about it in the assemblies, like this famous expression that made its way into an assembly talk by a district overseer.
Well, now, as Jehovah's Witnesses, as runners, even though some of us have become a little weary, it almost seems as though Jehovah has provided meat in due season, because He's held up before all of us a new goal, a new year, something to reach out for, and it just seems it's given all of us so much more energy and power in this final burst of speed for the finish line. And that's the year 1975. As one brother put it, stay alive to 75.
Let's take this August 15th, 1968 Watchtower article, for example. Not only did it have big headlines like this one, but further into the article, it also said, "One thing is absolutely certain. Bible chronology reinforced with fulfilled Bible prophecy shows that 6,000 years of man's existence will soon be up. Yes, within this generation." They even go as far as to say, this is not the time to be toying with the words of Jesus, that concerning the day or hour nobody knows, neither the angels of the heavens nor the Son, but only the Father. To the contrary, it is a time when we should be keenly aware that the end of this system of things is rapidly coming to its violent end. Quotes like these were sprinkled into books and magazines between 1966 and 1975, even going as far as creating a chart timeline to make the point clear. Let's take a look at one last quote. This time it's from the May 1974 Kingdom Ministry. Speaking of Jesus and his zeal for the preaching work, the Kingdom Ministry said this: "Should we not today be imitating his example, especially since we have such a short time left now in which to complete the kingdom preaching? Reports are heard of brothers selling their homes and property and planning to finish out the rest of their days in this old system in the pioneer service. Certainly this is a fine way to spend the short time remaining before the wicked world's end." Here, the society was encouraging and praising people for selling off all their belongings since there was such a short time left, no doubt contributing to the hype that the world would end in 1975. And as expected, 1975 came and went with no Armageddon in sight. Now, how did the organization respond to this? They eventually did vaguely respond to their 1975 prediction in the 2017 Don't Give Up convention.
Back then, some were looking to a certain date as signifying the end of this old system of things. A few even went so far as selling their homes and quitting their jobs. I admit, I was ready to see this old system go away too. But something just didn't seem right. Both at meetings and in my personal study, I was reminded of what Jesus said: "Nobody knows the day or hour." I was dedicated to Jehovah, not a date. After that year came and went, most of those who had wrong expectations made the needed adjustments, and they stayed.
The clip acknowledges the hype that was raised for the year 1975, even admitting that people were selling their homes, though they conveniently left out how the organization itself was praising those that did so in the Kingdom Ministry, and brushing it off as just the brothers having wrong expectations. Now, going back to our formula once again, we can see that all 3 points have been met, identifying the Watchtower once again as a false prophet. After defining what it means to be a false prophet and examining the organization's past quotes and predictions, we can see that the accusation that they are a false prophet does actually have merit, and they biblically fit the description of false prophet. We saw just a few predictions that they've made throughout the years. One for 1914, one for 1925, and one for 1975, and all their relevant quotes attributing those predictions to God by claiming them as a biblical fact. And then we saw how, inevitably, those predictions absolutely failed to come true. We'll even throw in the millions now living will never die as a bonus prediction. Now, I know that these are a lot of quotes to remember, so feel free to take a screenshot of this as a handy cheat sheet, and I'll also leave a link to an archive of old Watchtower literature in the description below. In prediction after prediction, we saw the same pattern emerging. First, they'll make the prediction. Then they'll claim that the prediction is a biblical fact, thus attributing it to God. Then finally, when the time comes and nothing happens, rather than apologizing or even acknowledging that they were at fault, they find a way to blame it on their followers, saying that they were just indulging in speculation, inflating their imaginations, or simply just had wrong expectations. They skip out on any responsibility that they had for making and promoting their prediction and creating the hype that captured their followers in the first place. This is dishonest and an attempt at rewriting history to try and avoid the label of false prophet. The only conclusion that one can reach after learning the biblical definition of false prophet and then comparing that to what the Watchtower Society has said in the past, well, I can't say it any better than how the organization themselves said it in the October 8, 1968 Awake. True, there have been those in times past who predicted an end to the world, even announcing a specific date. Yet, nothing happened. The end did not come. They were guilty of false prophesying. Why? What was missing? Missing was the full measure of evidence required in fulfillment of Bible prophecy. Missing from such people were God's truths and the evidence that He was guiding and using them. Thank you guys again for watching. I hope that you really enjoyed this video and you guys found it helpful. And if you did, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave me a comment down below. Special shout out to all of my patrons, and if you'd also like to support my work that I'm doing here on this channel, please consider becoming a patron over at patreon.com/jwreview. See you guys next time.